A splash of bow. That's all it took to destroy Elena Rodriguez's carefully invisible life. At 23, drowning in $80,000 of student debt, she perfected the art of being furniture at the Catedral, Manhattan's most exclusive restaurant where politicians whispered secrets and criminals ate beside celebrities. But when expensive wine landed on the polished shoe of Dante Marcelli, the city's most dangerous man, and he began insulting her in rapid Sicilian, the ancient dialect he assumed no American waitress could possibly understand, Elena made a choice. She could stay silent, stay invisible, stay safe, or she could use the very language her missing mother had taught her while investigating the Sicilian Mafia, look Manhattan's most feared crime boss in the eye, and speak 5 words that would either get her killed or change everything. Senor Capiscoco on parola. Sir, I understand every word. Hi friends. If you're already obsessed with this story, hit subscribe and like this video so you don't miss what happens next. Subscribe now. You'll thank me later. Now, back to Elena, who's about to do something incredibly brave or incredibly stupid. It was 900 p. on a Thursday, and the Catedral was operating at full capacity, which meant the kind of power that didn't need to announce itself. The restaurant existed in that rarefied Manhattan space where there were no signs on the door, no prices on the menu, and no questions asked about the men in the corner booths who made eye contact with no one. Elena Rodriguez, 23 years old and $80,000 in debt, moved through this world like smoke. She was by every academic measure exceptional. A dual degree in international relations and Italian-American studies from a top university, fluent in 4 languages, conversational in 2 more. Her senior thesis on the evolution of Sicilian organized crime had been called brilliant by professors who had no idea she'd written it while searching for answers about her own mother's disappearance. Carmen Rodriguez had been an investigative journalist, past tense. 5 years ago, she'd been working on an expose about historical Sicilian-American mafia ties when she'd simply vanished. No body, no evidence, no closure. Just an $80,000 debt from Elena's education and a cold case file the NYPD had long stopped pretending to investigate. So, Elena had become a ghost. Working at the Catedral wasn't just about paying bills. It was about access. These were the men who knew secrets. These were the tables where truth and lies exchanged hands along with briefcases full of cash. The voice belonged to Vincent Caruso, the restaurant's manager, a man whose permanent state of anxious terror made him sweat through expensive shirts. Corner booth. Marcelli party. They're here. Elena's blood went cold. Dante Marcelli. You know another Marcelli who gets a 12-man security detail and makes the mayor nervous. Caruso's hands shook as he adjusted his tie. He's in the private section. You're his server tonight. Why me? Because Maria called in sick, and you're the only one who hasn't screwed up this week. He leaned closer, his breath smelling of coffee and panic. Listen carefully. You do not speak unless spoken to. You do not look at him. You do not exist. This man, he swallowed hard. This man ends careers. Understand. Understood, Elena said, her voice steady despite her hammering heart. She grabbed the wine service, a 2015 Barrio that cost more than her monthly rent, and pushed through the heavy velvet curtain into the private dining section. The room fell silent when she entered, not because anyone noticed her, but because Dante Marcelli's presence seemed to consume all available oxygen. He was younger than she'd expected, 33, maybe, with the kind of dark, severe features that belonged in Renaissance paintings of warrior princes. He wore a charcoal suit that fit like it had been sewn onto his body, and when his eyes swept the room with cold calculation, Elena understood why grown men feared him. This wasn't just power. This was violence wrapped in expensive fabric. He was deep in conversation with 2 men, one older, clearly a conciliar, one younger, probably an associate. They were speaking in low, intense Italian. Business, the kind that didn't appear in legal documents. Elena approached with practiced invisibility. She moved to pour the wine, her hands steady, her face blank, and then the carpet betrayed her. A loose thread, barely noticeable, completely lethal. Her foot caught. The bottle tilted. Time slowed to a crawl as deep red wine arced through the air like blood. It didn't hit the table. It didn't hit his food. It landed directly on Dante Marcelli's immaculate leather shoe with a splash that sounded like a gunshot in the silent room. Everything stopped. The conciliary froze mid-sentence. The associate's eyes went wide. Every bodyguard in the room shifted position, hands moving toward concealed weapons. And Dante Marcelli slowly, with the mechanical precision of a predator deciding whether to strike, lifted his gaze from his ruined shoe to Elena's face. His eyes were black, empty, the kind of empty that came from seeing too much death and causing more. "Cazzo," he muttered. Then, without looking away from Elena, he switched to rapid Sicilian, the thick ancient dialect of Palermo, not the cleaned-up Italian taught in universities. He spoke to his associate, but loud enough to carry. "A stupid girl, clumsy as a pig and empty as a wooden head," he continued, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is the problem with America. They hire even the worst. Look at her. She can't even walk. She'd make me laugh if she wasn't so pathetic." The associate laughed nervously. The conciliar looked uncomfortable. Caruso appeared at the door, his face the color of old milk. "Marcelli, I am so sorry," he began, already pulling a cloth from his pocket. But Elena didn't move. Something inside her, some combination of rage and grief and 5 years of swallowing silence, simply snapped. Her mother had taught her Sicilian, not classroom Sicilian, but the real thing, the dialect of her grandmother's village, the language of old grudges and older secrets. Carmen Rodriguez had learned it while investigating the Mafia's historical roots. She'd taught it to Elena during late-night research sessions, making her daughter memorize phrases and pronunciations until they were perfect. "Languages are weapons, Elena," her mother had said. "The most powerful people never expect you to understand them. That's when you learn the truth." Elena sat down the wine bottle with deliberate care. She straightened, and when she spoke her voice was calm, clear, and devastatingly precise. "Signori Marcelli," she said in flawless Mr. Marcelli, "forgive me for the shoes, but my empty head understood that you were speaking of things that aren't legal. And you know what? You're not as good at hiding your business as you think." The room didn't just go silent. It went dead. Dante Marcelli's face drained of all color. His hand, reaching for his wine glass, froze in midair. His eyes, those cold, empty eyes, suddenly filled with something Elena had never seen in a man like him. Pure, undiluted shock mixed with the realization that he'd just been exposed by a waitress he'd assumed was furniture. The conciliary's mouth fell open. The associate looked like he might faint. Caruso made a sound like a dying animal. And Elena stood there, her heart hammering, knowing she'd just committed either the bravest or stupidest act of her life, possibly both. Dante Marcelli rose slowly from his chair. He was tall, taller than she'd realized. And when he took a step toward her, every protective instinct screamed at her to run, but she held her ground. His voice broke. He cleared his throat. "Tried again. Cusiero medio. How do you know how to speak my dialect?" Elena lifted her chin. Steady, defiant, possibly insane. "Chai," she said quietly. "Amat Rio investiga. Because my mother taught me before she disappeared while investigating your family." The words hung in the air like a thrown knife. And in that moment, Elena Rodriguez stopped being invisible. For better or worse, Dante Marcelli would never forget her name. The business card in Elena's pocket felt like it was burning through the fabric. She stood in the service corridor outside the private room, her back pressed against the cold wall, trying to remember how to breathe. Inside, she could hear muffled voices. Marcelli's security team doing a sweep, probably checking for listening devices, possibly discussing whether the waitress who just exposed herself as a threat needed to be handled. Her hands were shaking now. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was draining away, leaving behind pure crystalline terror. "What did I just do, Fisher?" Caruso's voice was ice. He appeared at the end of the corridor, his face purple with rage. "My office now." The walk felt like a death march. Other servers pressed themselves against the walls as they passed, eyes wide, already knowing. News traveled fast at the cathedral. The new girl had committed career suicide by insulting Dante Marcelli to his face. They just didn't know she'd done it in his native dialect. Caruso's office was small, cramped, smelling of stale coffee and desperation. He didn't sit. Neither did she. "You're fired," he said flatly. "Effective immediately. Clean out your locker." I want you out of this building in 10 minutes. Caruso, do you have any idea what you've done? His voice climbed toward hysteria. Dante Marcelli doesn't forgive embarrassment. He doesn't forget disrespect. Men who cross him, they disappear. Rodriguez, they have accidents. Their families have accidents. And you just insulted him in front of his people. He insulted me first, Elena said quietly. He's a billionaire crime lord. You're a waitress. The insult doesn't go both ways. Caruso was pacing now, pulling at his tie. I'm done. You're done. This requires someone who lived in the language, who knows it like breathing. And you think that's me. I know that's you. Last night, you didn't just speak Sicilian. You understood the cultural context of my insults well enough to throw them back in my face with precision. He leaned back. You're exactly what I need. Brilliant, desperate, and personally motivated to cooperate. By personally motivated, you mean you're dangling information about my mother like bait. I'm offering you a trade. You solve my problem. I give you access to my organization's archives. Everything we know about your mother's investigation, every name she talked to, every place she went, every thread she was pulling. Marcelli's expression was serious. Now I want answers, too, Miss Rodriguez. Someone in my organization made your mother disappear. That person is a problem I intend to eliminate. The room felt smaller, suddenly, the air electric with tension and possibility. $500,000, Elena said slowly. 1 month of work, full access to your archives, and you work as a consultant, not a subordinate. You report directly to me, answer to no one else. He paused. But you do this on my terms, my timeline. And if you find something in those archives that incriminates me personally, his eyes were black ice. You keep it to yourself until the job is done. So, I'm trading one master for another. You're trading invisibility for power. Marcelli stood, moved to the window, his silhouette dark against the bright sky. You've spent 2 years gathering crumbs. I'm offering you the whole table. The question is whether you're brave enough to sit at it. Elena stood as well, walked to where he stood, close enough to see the faint scar above his eyebrow, the tension in his jaw, the way his hands were loose at his sides, confident, dangerous, absolutely certain she'd say yes. I have conditions, she said. Of course you do. I'm a consultant, not an employee. I set my own hours. I have final say on my interpretations. You don't overrule me because you don't like the answer. Agreed. I get full access to the archives, not curated files, everything. And I get to make copies. His jaw tightened. Dangerous request. Necessary one. I'm not trusting my only leverage to your goodwill. Marcelli studied her for a long moment. Then, impossibly, he smiled. Sharp, predatory, but genuine. You negotiate like someone who's done this before. I've been poor my whole life. You learn to fight for every inch. Coraggio courage. He extended his hand. We have a deal, Miss Rodriguez. Elena looked at his hand, broad, callous, despite the expensive suits, the hand of a man who'd built an empire through violence and will. She could walk away, stay invisible, stay safe. Or she could shake the devil's hand and finally get answers. She took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, electric. We have a deal, Mr. Dante, he said. If we're going to work together, use my name. Elena. He knows he can't hide forever. Where did he hide it? Stop being impatient. I'm a patient man. You're really not. Elena scanned the next several lines, her mind working faster as the patterns emerged. This is clever. He's not just using proverbs. He's layering them. Each one contains a clue to the next. It's a linguistic scavenger hunt. Explain. Line 5. Kucherkova Maninchita Kirka who searches finds, but not always what they're searching for. That's a location clue. He's saying the ledger is somewhere people are searching, but not for the right thing. Dante's intensity sharpened. My people have been searching his apartment, his office, his known associates. But you're searching for a digital ledger. He's saying you're looking in the wrong format. Elena's excitement was building. Now the intellectual puzzle igniting something in her brain that had been dormant for years. What if it's not digital anymore? What if he converted it to what? Line 8 gives us the answer. A Cartasi Anera paper sings Fish Don't Talk. She looked up at him triumphant. He printed it. The ledger is on paper. Actual physical paper. For the first time since she'd met him, Dante Marcelli looked impressed. In 43 lines of coded text, you found that in under 10 minutes. I'm good at my job. Remember that when you're writing my performance review. I'm beginning to think I'm underpaying you. You're definitely underpaying me. I'll renegotiate after I save your criminal empire. She bent back to the text, her fingers flying across her phone screen. Now we need location. That's going to be harder. The proverbs from lines 15-23 are all about family, loyalty, blood. He's saying, wait. She stopped. Reread the section. Her blood went cold. Dante's voice was sharp. What did you find? Line 19. Blood isn't water, but betrayal turns it red. Elena looked up at him. Alessandro isn't just telling you where the ledger is. He's telling you who forced him to steal it. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Someone with blood ties. Someone in your family. She hesitated. The next line confirms it. Katiroi, who raises you destroys you. Someone who was supposed to be loyal. Someone close. Someone who had access to Alessandro and could pressure him. Dante stood abruptly, his chair scraping against concrete. He walked to the wall of monitors, his back to her, his shoulders rigid with barely contained fury. My cousin, he said quietly. Lorenzo, he's been circling for years, thinking he deserves what my father left me. Would Alessandro be loyal to him? Alessandro served my father. When my father died, Lorenzo tried to claim Alessandro's loyalty along with everything else. Dante's hands clenched into fists. I thought I'd resolved it. Apparently, I was wrong. Elena stood, walked around the table toward him. Not too close. He was radiating violence like heat from a furnace, but close enough to speak quietly. Then we need to find the ledger before Lorenzo does, she said. Alessandro knew this place. He worked for my father for 15 years. If he wanted to hide something here, then we would have found it. Elena looked at him. Really, looked at him. The frustration in his face was deeper than just a missing ledger. It was personal. This was your father's house. It was, you don't like being here. Dante was quiet for a long moment. Then my father built an empire. He also built a prison. This house, it's where he taught me what power costs. What loyalty demands. What happens to people who betray the family. He gestured at the darkening estate. Every room has a memory. Most of them aren't good. The vulnerability in his voice surprised her. This wasn't the cold crime boss from the war room. This was something raw, more human. Is that why you never sold it? Elena asked quietly. I can't sell it. It's a monument, family history. My cousins would riot if I tried. His smile was bitter. So it sits here empty. A testament to a man who loved power more than his own son. We should go. He started the engine. There's a safe house in Brooklyn. We'll regroup there. Go through the proverbs again with fresh eyes. Maybe we're translating wrong. We're not translating wrong. I'm certain of that. Then we're missing context. He pulled out of the driveway, the gates opening automatically as they approached. Either way, we're not finding it tonight. The safe house in Brooklyn was actually a beautifully restored brownstone that probably cost several million. Elena was beginning to understand that Dante Marcelli's version of safe came with hardwood floors and designer furniture. You have remarkable taste for someone who threatens people professionally, Elena said, looking around the living room. I contain multitudes. Dante was in the kitchen. Open concept, naturally pulling out ingredients with the efficiency of someone who actually knew how to cook. Are you hungry? Starving, actually. I've been too focused on ancient Sicilian to remember to eat. Then sit. I'll make dinner. You cook. You sound surprised. You have people for everything else. I assumed you had people for food, too. Dante smiled. Small, genuine. My grandmother taught me. She said, a man who can't feed himself is at the mercy of others. She didn't raise me to be at anyone's mercy. Smart woman, terrifying woman. She survived fascism, war, immigration, and my grandfather. She was made of iron wrapped in lace. He pulled out a cutting board, began dicing tomatoes with professional precision. She also spoke the old Sicilian, the dialect, you know. When she heard me speak Italian instead of her language, she'd hit me with a wooden spoon. Elena laughed, surprising herself. My mother did the same thing. Not the wooden spoon, but the disappointment was worse. She'd spent so much time learning Sicilian for her research, she wanted me to appreciate it, preserve it. She sounds like someone my grandmother would have liked. The old cemetery. Dante was already reaching for his phone. Red Hook has a historic cemetery, closed to the public for years. My father used to own the property through a shell company. That's where Alessandro hid the real ledger. Not the one Lorenzo has a backup insurance. Alessandro knew Lorenzo would come for him. So he created a decoy and hid the real evidence where only someone who understood the full message could find it. Dante was already on the phone. Raphael, Red Hook Cemetery. I need a team there in 20 minutes. Full tactical. We're recovering something, and I guarantee Lorenzo will have the same idea once he realizes the ledger he has is fake. You're staying here. Like hell I am. Elena, don't you dare. She stood, met his intensity with her own. Alessandro left that message for someone who could understand it. That someone is me. If there are more codes, more clues hidden at that location, you need me there to interpret them. It's going to be dangerous. Everything about this has been dangerous. I'm not stopping now. You could die. So could you. And I'm not letting you go alone. She moved closer, her voice dropping. You said, I'm the only person you trust. That goes both ways now. We do this together or not at all. Dante stared at her, and she could see the war in his eyes, the need to protect her, battling with the knowledge that she was right. You stay behind me at all times, he said finally. You do exactly what I say. And if shooting starts, you run. Understood. Understood. I'm serious, Elena. I won't risk you. And I won't let you face your cousin alone. She reached up, cupped his face. We're in this together now. For better or worse. Definitely worse. But he pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most reckless. You keep saying that like they're different things. Despite everything, the danger, the death, the violence waiting for them in a cemetery. He laughed. You make me crazy. You were too controlled before. It was boring. I'm a crime boss. I'm not supposed to be entertaining. You're failing spectacularly at that. He kissed her then hard and desperate, like a man going to war who needed to remember what he was fighting for. Elena kissed him back with equal intensity, pouring everything into it, fear and desire, and the desperate hope that they'd both survive the night. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Dante pressed something cold into her hand. A small handgun, compact and deadly. Do you know how to use this? He asked. My mother taught me. She said, a woman investigating dangerous men should know how to defend herself. Elena's throat tightened. She was right. Safety's here. Point and shoot. Aim center mass. His eyes were dark. Serious. But Elena, only if you absolutely have to. Once you pull that trigger, there's no going back. You'll be marked connected to this world forever. Kept his mouth shut for 5 years. Lorenzo laughed. But you couldn't leave it alone. Had to hire the daughter. Had to let her dig. Now look where it got you. Dante looked at Elena, and in his eyes she saw confirmation. That Lorenzo had just confessed to her mother's murder, that all of this 5 years of searching, of grief, of wondering ended here in a cemetery with the truth spoken by the man who'd taken everything from her. He's moving, Raphael hissed from the window. 4 men advancing on our position. Elena moved to the opposite window, peered out. Through the darkness, she could see shapes moving, tactical, coordinated, and she could hear voices low and urgent, Italian, but not standard Italian. Sicilian slang mixed with what sounded like Calabrian dialect. A conversation between Lorenzo's men about positioning, about timing, about the flanking maneuver they were setting up on the mausoleum's blind side. Dante, Elena said urgently. They're coming around the east wall. 4 men they're saying. She listened harder. Ucup wagnumu aorta. When the boss gives the signal, we blow the door. Dante's head snapped toward her. They have explosives. That's what they said. 30 seconds. When Lorenzo gives the word. Raphael, east wall. Now take them before they set charges. Raphael and 2 men slipped out through a side window, moving like shadows. Seconds later, gunfire erupted. Brutal. The sound of a fight at knife-fighting distance. 2 down. Raphael's voice came through the radio. 3rd is running. Merida. An explosion rocked the night. Not the door, but somewhere near the cemetery's entrance. Flashbang or grenade. Elena couldn't tell. The sound was followed by screaming in Italian. That's our backup, Dante said. Lorenzo's pinned between us and reinforcements. Then he's going to get desperate. Elena's tactical mind was working overtime now. He needs to end this fast, or he loses everything. As if summoning him with her words. The mausoleum door shuddered. Not an explosion. Someone kicking it hard. Lorenzo's voice no longer amplified right outside. Open the door. Let's talk like family. Doesn't murder family. Dante called back. Family does what's necessary. Our father taught us that. I have Alessandro's ledger. The real one. Every transaction, every name, every dirty deal our family made for 30 years. You know what that's worth to the feds, to your rivals. Then why haven't you sold it yet? Because I want what's mine by right. The business, the organization, the respect. Lorenzo's voice hardened. You're weak, Dante. You hire outsiders. You trust women. You're making us soft. I'm saving the family from your weakness. Elena felt Dante's rage like a living thing beside her. Your move, Coino, Lorenzo called. Come out, or I burn this place down with you in it. Dante looked at Raphael. How many men do we have now? 8 plus backup is 90 seconds out. Enough. Dante checked his weapon, then looked at Elena. Stay here. Whatever happens. Raphael held up a phone. Alessandro left digital breadcrumbs. Final location is uploading now. Let me see. The coordinates appeared. Not the cemetery, not a warehouse, the cadrail. The restaurant where this had all started. Hidden in the wine cellar in the very place Elena had spilled Bo on a crime boss's shoe and changed both their lives forever. Cristo, Elena breathed. He hid it where we met. Poetic, Raphael said dryly. I'll send a team. No, Elena stood. I'll get it. It's mine to find. She looked at Dante on the stretcher, his eyes closed, his face peaceful despite the wound. 2 press 2, she whispered, pressing a kiss to his forehead. I'll be back soon. His hand caught hers. T aspitu, I'll wait for you. Always the romantic, even when bleeding. Special mint when bleeding, more dramatic. She laughed, slightly hysterical, mostly relieved. And then she was running toward Raphael's car, toward the restaurant where a dead man had hidden the truth, toward the final piece of her mother's story, and toward the future she and Dante might actually survive to have together. The ledger was exactly where Alessandro had hidden it, in the wine cellar of the cathedral, tucked inside a hollowed-out case of 1985 Brunello, surrounded by bottles that cost more than most people's cars. The irony wasn't lost on Elena. Her mother's killer had hidden the evidence of his crimes in the exact place where Elena had accidentally started this whole chain of events, where Bo had spilled and Sicilian had been spoken and 2 lives had collided with enough force to change everything. She held the waterproof case in her hands, surprisingly light for something that contained so much weight. Financial records, names, transactions, proof of 30 years of organized crime, all meticulously documented by a man who'd been too afraid to expose it while he was alive. Raphael's team secured it, photographed every page, uploaded encrypted copies to 3 separate servers. By dawn, the evidence would be in the hands of Dante's lawyers, his accountants, and if Elena had anything to say about it, the FBI agents investigating the Marcelli family's legitimate businesses. But first, she needed to get back to Dante. The penthouse was quiet when she arrived at 4 a.m., still dark outside, the city, a carpet of lights below. Raphael had texted that Dante was stable. The bullet had missed anything vital. He'd refused to stay in the hospital because crime bosses didn't trust doctors they couldn't control. Elena found him in the master bedroom, a space she hadn't seen before. All dark wood and expensive linens and windows that overlooked the Hudson. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, shirtless, his shoulder professionally bandaged, his face pale but alert. You should be resting, Elena said from the doorway. I was waiting for you. His voice was rough, tired. Did you find it? We found it. Alessandro documented everything. Your operations are clean, provably legitimate. Lorenzo's conspiracy falls apart the moment anyone reads that ledger. She moved into the room, set down her bag. You're safe. Your business is safe. It's over. It's not over. Dante's expression was dark. Lorenzo had partners, rival families who were counting on him to deliver. They're not going to forget this. They're not going to forget you. Then we deal with them. Elena, no? She sat beside him on the bed, careful not to jostle his wounded shoulder. You took a bullet for me. You don't get to push me away now because things might get dangerous. Things have been dangerous since the moment I opened my mouth in that restaurant. This is different. Before, you were a tool, a means to an end. Now he looked at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her chest ache. Now you're a target because they know what you mean to me. Because they know hurting you is the fastest way to destroy me. So we're both targets. We'll just have to be careful together. You're not listening. I'm listening perfectly. You're trying to protect me by pushing me away. It's very noble and very stupid. She took his hand, laced their fingers together. I'm not going anywhere, Dante. We finish this together. All of it. The threat, the fallout, the future together. He stared at their joined hands, his jaw working. I need to tell you something about your mother, about what really happened. Elena's heart clenched. My father, he was the one who gave the order. Dante's voice was flat, controlled, like he was reading from a script to keep the emotion out. Alessandro told him that a journalist was asking questions, getting too close to financial connections we'd spent decades building. My father saw her as a threat to the family, so he ordered Lorenzo to handle it. Elena repeated, You mean kill her? Make her disappear? Same result. Dante's hand tightened on hers. I was 28. I'd just taken over after my father's death. I didn't know about any of it until months later. And by then, it was done. Your mother was gone. Alessandro was terrified into silence. Lorenzo was untouchable because he'd done it for family. You could have told the police and destroyed everything my father built, torn apart the organization, put dozens of people in prison who were just following orders. Dante's voice was bitter. I was a coward. I chose family over justice. I chose silence over truth. A museum seeking authentication of recently acquired manuscripts. Legitimate work. Clean money. The kind of business that wouldn't get anyone killed mostly. You're thinking too loud again, Dante said from where he stood at the windows. His shoulder fully healed, his suit immaculate, his presence still magnetic enough to make her pulse stutter. I'm reviewing contracts. That requires thinking. That requires you making that face where you're about to find a problem I missed. You didn't miss anything. These are solid. She sat down the papers, walked to where he stood, overlooking the Hudson. 3 major contracts in our first month. Not bad for a reformed crime organization. Reformed is a strong word. Reforming. Then she leaned against him, felt his arm come around her waist automatically. You've cut ties with everyone who wouldn't transition to legal business. You've divested from anything that couldn't withstand federal scrutiny. You're paying taxes, Dante. Actual taxes, the ultimate sign of legitimacy or insanity, one of the two. He smiled, pressed a kiss to her temple. I got a call from the university this morning. Elena straightened, her heart skipping. And they've approved the scholarship fund, full ride, tuition, housing, stipend for living expenses for students pursuing degrees in obscure languages, cultural studies, or investigative journalism. His voice was quiet, proud. They're calling it the Carmen Rodriguez Memorial Scholarship for Cultural Preservation. 6 weeks ago, when Dante had proposed the partnership, full equity in the new firm, equal authority, a genuine chance to build something meaningful. She'd had one condition. I want to establish a scholarship, she'd said, sitting across from him in the war room where they decoded Alessandro's message. In my mother's name, for students like me, brilliant, ambitious, drowning in debt, students who shouldn't have to choose between their education and their survival. Students who deserve better than spending their genius serving wine to people who see them as furniture. Dante hadn't hesitated. How much do you need? 5 million endowed. Enough to fund 10 students per year indefinitely. What else? She'd stared at him. That's $5 million, Dante. You're not even going to negotiate. Why would I negotiate? It's a perfect idea. He'd leaned forward, his intensity focused entirely on her. Your mother died searching for truth. This ensures her death meant something. That her legacy lives on through students who will keep asking hard questions, who will keep demanding answers from powerful people who want to stay hidden. You realize you're funding people who might investigate you someday. She'd pointed out. Keeps me honest. His smile had been sharp but genuine. Besides, I have you. If I start slipping back into darkness, you'll call me on it. Damn right I will. Now, 6 weeks later, the scholarship was real, approved, funded. The first cohort of students would be selected by next fall. Help me build something that matters. Something clean. Something your mother would have approved of. That's a much better proposal than the hospital version. I've had time to practice. And the answer is still yes. She laughed through tears as he slid the ring onto her finger. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll be your partner. Yes to all of it. He kissed her then, deep and claiming and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, the intercom buzzed. Capo, Raphael's voice crackled through. The tiramisu is here. Also, your 3 o'clock appointment arrived early. Tell them 5 minutes, Dante replied, not taking his eyes off Elena. Elena looked at her ring, then at Dante, then at the city spreading out below them. We're really doing this. Building a legitimate business, making actual positive change, getting married, having that romantic dinner I promised you 6 weeks ago. You're very focused on the dinner. I'm very focused on keeping my promises to you. He laced their fingers together, the ring catching the afternoon light. Every single one. Even the one about dessert, especially that one. They stood there for a moment. Two people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances. A spilled glass of wine. A language that shouldn't have been understood. A collision of worlds that should never have mixed. I have one more condition, Elena said. When we get married, I want it in Sicily. In your grandmother's village, the one where the dialect comes from. Dante's expression softened with something that looked like wonder. You want to marry me in the place my family came from. I want to honor where you came from while building where we're going. Your grandmother survived fascism and war and immigration. She raised a son who built an empire. That empire had darkness, yes, but it also had strength and resilience and the will to survive. I want to acknowledge that, honor it, while we transform it into something better. You're remarkable. I'm practical and sentimental. It's a confusing combination. It's perfect. He pulled her close. Sicily, it is my grandmother's village. We'll say our vows in Sicilian, the real dialect, not the tourist version. Obviously, I didn't learn it just to insult crime bosses. You learned it to marry one. Much better use. Reformed crime boss. Reforming. He corrected with a smile. The intercom buzzed again. Capo, they're getting impatient. Let them wait. But Dante stepped back, straightened his tie, shifted into business mode with practiced ease. Ready to go terrify some corporate executives with your brilliance. Always. They walked toward the conference room together, partners in every sense of the word, equal, trusted, building something that neither of them could have built alone. Behind them, the Manhattan skyline glittered in afternoon sun. Ahead of them, a future that looked nothing like what either had planned, but everything like what they needed. When they kissed, the church erupted in applause. When they walked out into the Sicilian sunshine, rice and flower petals raining down. They weren't a crime boss and a waitress anymore. They were partners, equals, builders of something new. That night at the reception in a villa overlooking the sea, Dante pulled Elena onto the terrace away from the celebration. He asked deliriously. She leaned into him, watched the sun set over the Mediterranean. Your grandmother would have approved. She would have loved you possibly more than she loved me. That's because I'm more lovable. Can't argue with that. They stood in comfortable silence. The sound of celebration drifting from inside, laughter, music, the clinking of glasses and toast after toast. The first scholarship recipients start next month, Elena said quietly. 10 students, 10 brilliant minds who get to pursue truth without drowning in debt. Your mother's legacy. Our legacy. She looked up at him. We built this together. The clean business, the scholarship, this future, all of it. You built it. I just provided the funding. You provided the courage to change. That's harder than money. Dante pulled her close, pressed a kiss to her hair. Gracia, Elena P. Turicosi. Thank you, Elena, for everything. Thank you for listening when I spoke, for seeing me when everyone else looked through me. She smiled. For ruining my life in the best possible way. You ruined mine first. That barrow cost $800. Best $800 you ever spent without question. Inside, someone called for the bride and groom. The celebration was waiting. The future was waiting. But for one more moment, they stood together on a terrace in Sicily. Two people who'd found each other through chaos and choice in a language that connected them across centuries. Ready to go back? Dante asked. Ready to start our life? Elena countered. Sri always. They walked back into the celebration hand in hand into a future they'd built together, into a legacy that honored the past while creating something entirely new. And somewhere in the warm Sicilian night, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the ghost of an old woman laughing with approval. Because her grandson had finally found someone worthy of the family name. Someone who saw the man, not the empire, someone brave enough to speak truth to power in the language of his grandmother's village. In the only words that mattered, Ti amo, I love you. And that was worth more than any empire. 2 years later, Elena Rodriguez stood in the marble lobby of the Marcelli Cultural Foundation, watching a group of scholarship recipients enter for their first day of orientation. The building had once housed a money laundering operation disguised as an import business. Now it served as headquarters for legitimate enterprises and the Carmen Rodriguez Memorial Scholarship Program that had grown beyond their wildest expectations. The morning sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting patterns across polished marble that had been cleaned of more than dust and grime. It had been cleansed of the blood money that once flowed through these halls, transformed into something that honored memory rather than buried it. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Dante, who was finishing a meeting with federal prosecutors in the conference room upstairs. Still discussing the Torino case. Should be done in an hour. Dinner at 8 still good. She smiled, typing back. Perfect. I'll be in the archive room reviewing applications. The archive room had become Elena's sanctuary, a space where she spent hours each day reviewing scholarship applications from students whose stories reminded her of her own. Brilliant minds trapped by circumstances, desperate for the chance to prove their worth in a world that saw them as invisible. Today's batch included a young man from the Bronx studying medieval linguistics, a woman from Queens pursuing investigative journalism, and a graduate student from Brooklyn whose thesis on organized crime's historical impact on immigrant communities made Elena's chest tighten with familiar recognition. She was deep in reviewing the journalism applicant's portfolio when footsteps echoed in the hallway. Not Dante's confident stride, but something lighter, more hesitant. Elena looked up to see a young woman standing in the doorway, clutching a manila folder against her chest like armor. "I'm sorry to interrupt," the woman said, her voice carrying a slight accent that Elena couldn't immediately place. "I was told I might find Elena Rodriguez here." "That's me." Elena set down the applications, studying the visitor. Early 20s, nervous energy, intelligent eyes that seemed to catalog every detail of the room. "Are you here about the scholarship program?" "Not exactly." The woman stepped into the room, her grip tightening on the folder. "My name is Sofia Torino. I think my father might have been involved in something that affected your family." Elena's blood went cold. The Torino case. The investigation that had consumed Dante's attention for the past 6 months, unraveling connections between his family's old business and a trafficking operation that had been using their former shipping routes. A case that had led to arrests, convictions, and the discovery of crimes that stretched back decades. "Please sit." Elena gestured to the chair across from her desk. "What kind of involvement?" Sofia perched on the edge of the chair, her posture rigid with barely contained anxiety. "My father was Antonio Torino. He worked for the Marcelli organization in the 80s and 90s. Import-export, or what everyone pretended was import-export. He died 5 years ago, but before he died, he gave me this." She opened the manila folder, revealing a collection of photographs, documents, and what appeared to be handwritten notes in Italian. Elena leaned forward, recognizing the careful documentation style that had become familiar through her work with the Foundation's historical research. "He documented everything," Sofia continued. "Every shipment, every payment, every person who was hurt by what they were doing. He was too scared to come forward while he was alive, but he wanted someone to know the truth. When I read about your foundation, about what happened to your mother, I thought maybe you'd understand." Elena's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the photographs. They showed shipping containers, warehouse operations, faces she didn't recognize, but cargo that made her stomach turn. These weren't the relatively clean financial crimes that Alessandro had documented. This was something darker, more personal. "Why bring this to me instead of the police?" Elena asked quietly. "Because the police think the case is closed." Sofia's voice hardened. "They arrested the current operators, shut down the active trafficking, claimed victory. But this shows it was happening long before the current generation took over. It shows people were hurt, families destroyed, and nobody ever paid for those crimes." The conference room door opened upstairs, followed by the sound of voices and footsteps. Dante's meeting was ending. Elena looked at the documents spread across her desk, then at Sofia's desperate expression, and made a decision that felt both inevitable and terrifying. "I need you to understand something," Elena said. "If we pursue this, it's going to open wounds that have barely healed. It's going to drag my husband's family through investigations they've spent years trying to put behind them. I know." Sofia's voice was steady. "But it's also going to give justice to people who never got it, including your mother." Elena's breath caught. "What does my mother have to do with this?" Sofia pulled out a photograph from the bottom of the stack. It showed a woman with dark hair and determined eyes, standing outside a warehouse with a camera in her hands. Elena recognized her immediately, even though the photo had been taken shortly before Carmen Rodriguez disappeared. "My father was there the night they brought your mother to the warehouse," Sofia said quietly. "He was supposed to help dispose of her car, make it look like she'd simply vanished. Instead, he took this picture and kept it for 20 years, along with documentation of everything else they did that night." The room spun around Elena as she stared at the photograph. Her mother, alive, working, dangerous. The last picture ever taken of Carmen Rodriguez, captured by a man who'd been too afraid to save her but brave enough to document her murder. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, growing closer. Dante's voice carried from the elevator, discussing legal strategy with someone Elena didn't recognize. In moments, he'd find her here with evidence that could destroy everything they'd built together. Sofia seemed to sense the tension. "I can leave," she said quickly. "Take the documents with me. Pretend this conversation never happened." "No." Elena's voice was firm. "We don't run from the truth. Not anymore." She gathered the photographs and documents, sliding them back into the folder with hands that were steadier than she felt. "But we do this carefully, legally, with full transparency and cooperation with the authorities. Even if it implicates your husband's organization. Especially if it implicates my husband's organization." Elena looked at Sofia directly. "The only way we honor the dead is by ensuring the living face justice." Dante appeared in the doorway, his expression shifting from relaxed to alert as he took in the scene. Elena with a stranger, documents on the desk, an atmosphere of tension that he recognized from too many dangerous situations. "Elena," he said carefully, "is everything all right?" She looked at him, the man she loved, the empire he'd inherited, the future they'd built on the ashes of his family's crimes. Then she looked at the folder containing evidence that could burn it all down. "Dante," she said, her voice calm and clear, "I need you to call your lawyers. And then I need you to sit down, because there's something we have to discuss." Sofia shifted uncomfortably in her chair, clearly regretting her decision to come forward. Elena reached across the desk and touched her hand gently. "You did the right thing," she said. "Truth is always worth protecting. Even when it destroys everything you've built," Dante asked quietly. He'd moved into the room now, closing the door behind him, his expression unreadable. Especially then. Elena opened the folder and turned it so he could see the contents. "Because what we've built isn't worth preserving if it's built on lies." Dante stared at the photographs for a long moment, his face going through a series of emotions that Elena recognized. Recognition, regret, and finally, a kind of resigned determination that she'd seen before when he made the hardest choices. "How long do you think we have before this becomes public?" he asked Sofia. "That depends on what you decide to do with it," she replied. "My father wanted justice, not revenge. If you're willing to cooperate with a proper investigation, to help identify victims and provide restitution where possible, then maybe this can be handled with some degree of discretion. And if we refuse, then I take it to the newspapers and let them decide how the story gets told." Dante nodded slowly. "Smart." He looked at Elena. "What do you want to do?" "The right thing." The answer came without hesitation. "Whatever the cost." 6 months later, Elena stood in a courtroom in Lower Manhattan, watching federal prosecutors present evidence that had taken decades to surface. The Torino documents had opened an investigation that reached far beyond anything they'd initially imagined, exposing crimes that connected multiple crime families, corrupt officials, and trafficking operations that had destroyed countless lives. Dante sat in the defendant's section, wearing a suit that cost more than most people's cars, but couldn't disguise the weight he'd lost or the exhaustion that came from months of cooperation with federal investigators. He'd pled guilty to conspiracy charges related to his family's historical operations, accepting responsibility for crimes he hadn't personally committed but had profited from. The judge was reading the sentence now. 18 months in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised release and community service. It was less than the prosecutors had initially sought, a recognition of his cooperation and the genuine efforts he'd made to transform his organization. Elena felt Sofia squeeze her hand. The young woman had become an unlikely friend over the past months, bonding over their shared commitment to truth and their complicated relationships with justice. Sofia's father had been posthumously granted immunity in exchange for his documentation, His legacy transformed from criminal accomplice to reluctant witness. When court adjourned, Elena walked with Dante through the gauntlet of reporters and photographers. They prepared for this moment, knowing that their story would be told whether they controlled it or not. "Any regrets?" a reporter shouted. Dante paused, looking back at the courthouse steps. "Only that it took so long," he said quietly. "Truth delayed is truth denied." That evening, Elena sat alone in the penthouse that would soon belong to someone else, part of the restitution agreement with federal prosecutors. The view was the same, the Hudson River reflecting city lights like scattered diamonds, but everything else had changed. Her phone rang. Dante's voice came through clearly despite the static of the prison connection. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Missing you, but proud of us." She leaned against the window, watching traffic move along the waterway where ships had once carried cargo she didn't want to think about. "The foundation is thriving. We approved 30 new scholarships this quarter." "Good." His voice carried a smile she could hear. "And the historical research project. Sophia's been amazing. We're identifying victims, connecting with families, building a database that law enforcement can use for cold cases. It's going to take years, but we're finally giving people answers." They talked for the allowed 15 minutes about everything except how much they missed each other, how strange it felt to sleep alone, how many times Elena had reached for her phone to share some small moment only to remember he couldn't answer. When the call ended, she walked to the bedroom and opened the drawer where she kept his letters. He wrote every day, careful observations about prison life, plans for the future, reflections on the choices that had brought them here. The letters that mattered most were the ones where he wrote about forgiveness, not seeking it from others, but finding it within himself. Elena pulled out paper and began writing her own letter, telling him about Sophia's latest breakthrough in the archives, about the journalism student whose investigation had led to arrests in a human trafficking case, about the linguistics scholar who was preserving dialects of dying languages. She wrote about the Carmen Rodriguez Memorial Scholarship recipients making a difference in the world, carrying forward the mission of truth-telling that had cost her mother her life. She wrote about the Foundation's work providing legal aid to trafficking victims, about the safe houses they'd funded, about the lives being rebuilt because he'd chosen truth over self-preservation. Most importantly, she wrote about love that survived scandal, partnership that endured separation, and the future they would build together when his debt to justice was paid. Outside, snow began to fall on Manhattan, covering the city in pristine white that would last until morning before giving way to the grime and complexity of real life. But for now, everything was clean, beautiful, possible. Elena sealed the letter and set it aside to mail tomorrow. Then she returned to the archive room, where boxes of documents waited to be reviewed, victims to be identified, truths to be uncovered. The work would continue whether Dante was beside her or not, because some missions were bigger than any individual. But she worked faster when she could hear his voice, when his letters reminded her that redemption was possible, when she knew he'd be coming home to help finish what they'd started together. 1 year later, Elena stood at the arrival gate of JFK Airport, watching passengers stream through the terminal. She wore a simple blue dress and held a sign that read "Welcome Home" in English and Sicilian, a private joke between them about languages as weapons and words as bridges. When Dante emerged from the jetway, he looked older but lighter, as if the weight of decades had finally lifted from his shoulders. He'd spent his time in federal prison teaching literacy classes and learning sustainable agriculture, preparing for the community service requirements that would define the next phase of his life. They stood looking at each other for a moment, two people who'd lost everything and found something better in the ruins. "Ready to go home?" Elena asked. "Where's home?" he replied. She smiled, linking her arm through his. "Wherever we decide to build it." They walked through the terminal together, past security barriers and into the bright afternoon sun. Behind them, the past waited to be processed, archived, learned from. Ahead of them, the future spread out like an unwritten story, full of possibility and second chances. In the car, Elena handed him a manila folder. "Final quarterly report," she said. 112 scholarship recipients, 42 cold cases resolved, 18 trafficking victims provided with legal aid and safe housing. Dante opened the folder, scanning the numbers that represented lives changed, truths revealed, justice finally served. At the bottom of the report was a photograph of this year's scholarship recipients, young men and women from backgrounds similar to Elena's, given chances they'd never had before. Your mother would be proud, he said quietly. So would your grandmother. Elena started the engine, ready to get back to work. Always, he replied, reaching for her hand. They drove into the city together, toward the foundation offices where Sophia waited with new cases to review, toward the community service projects that would occupy Dante's time for the next 5 years, toward the life they'd chosen when they decided truth mattered more than comfort. The Manhattan skyline rose before them, glittering with promise and possibility. Somewhere in those buildings, powerful people were making choices that would affect countless lives. Some would choose honor, some would choose expedience. But thanks to the foundation, thanks to the scholarships, thanks to the young journalists and linguists and investigators they'd trained, fewer of those choices would be made in darkness. Elena Rodriguez had learned to speak Sicilian to preserve her mother's memory. Dante Marcelli had learned to speak truth to honor his family's legacy. Together, they discovered that the most powerful language was the one that connected justice to love, redemption to responsibility, and the past to a future worth building. As they pulled into the foundation parking lot, Elena squeezed Dante's hand. "Welcome home," she said. "Thank you," he replied. "For waiting, for believing, for choosing the hard path, for choosing us," she corrected. They walked into the building together, ready to continue the work that had brought them together, sustained them through separation, and would define them for whatever time they had left. Outside, the city hummed with the voices of 8 million people, each carrying stories of hope and loss, love and betrayal, truth and lies. But inside the Carmen Rodriguez Memorial Foundation, 2 people who'd found each other in the most unlikely circumstances continued the work of turning pain into purpose, secrets into justice, and love into something that could change the world one truth at a time. The story would continue tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. Because some stories never really end. They just transform into something larger than the people who started them. Something that honors the dead while serving the living. Something that proves love can survive anything when it's built on the foundation of absolute truth. And in the end, that was worth more than any empire.